For my thoughts on all the latest happenings in the NFL in a completely relaxed, unscripted format, be sure to check out my channel, JG9 News. And now, on with our feature presentation. The 1996 season was a really disappointing one for the Detroit Lions. In fact, you could make the legitimate argument that it was one of the most disappointing seasons in franchise history, considering the expectation that fans had not for just the Lions entering the season, but for the team during the season as well. This was a team that had usually been consistently good throughout the first half of the 1990s, having made the postseason in 4 of the last 5 seasons, with Wayne Fontes at the helm as head coach. Prior to a bad loss in the wildcard round against the Philadelphia Eagles, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner, the Lions ended the 1995 regular season on a 7-game winning streak, and it seemed as though they had their franchise quarterback that had evaded them for so long in Scott Mitchell, especially after Mitchell threw 32 touchdown passes and 4,338 yards in 1995, finishing 3rd in the league in touchdowns and 2nd in passing yards. In fact, the Lions were considered to be so good heading into the 1996 season that their odds to win the Super Bowl were plus 1,500, which was the 6th highest of any team in football. For some perspective, the New England Patriots, who made the Super Bowl and represented the AFC that year, were at plus 2,000. So the Lions had better odds than Bill Parcells' squad. And after a 4-2 start to the season, including a shutout victory on the road against Tampa Bay, everyone expected that this Lions team, much like the Lions teams of the past few years, would be a formidable opponent and would make it to the playoffs. They had high goals and aspirations. Speaking of high goals and aspirations, we are so close to 60,000 subscribers, so be sure to hit that like button and subscribe and hit that notification bell down below. We are trying to reach 60K and build the best football community on this platform to talk all things NFL history all the time, so be sure to do all that down below, and your support would be greatly appreciated. Thanks in advance. And then, everything collapsed. The bottom fell out underneath them, as you've been able to tell from these highlights the entire time. What started off as a 4-2 season with tons of expectations turned into a disastrous 5-11 campaign that ended up getting head coach Wayne Fontes fired, as the Lions dropped 9 of their final 10 games and ended the season on an abysmal 5-game losing streak. During this stretch of play, everything that could have gone wrong for Detroit did. It was basically an inverse of the 1995 season in every single way. However, there's one story from that 1996 Lions season that has seemingly been forgotten about nearly 3 decades later that deserves a deep dive today, because it highlights the dysfunction and the turmoil within that organization. Because what if the final straw that broke the camel's back, and the final moment that made everything explode, was because of God? Seriously, what if Jesus Christ himself was the reason that the Detroit Lions were a dysfunctional mess that season? I am not exaggerating. In 1996, everything fell apart at the very end of the year because of God. And this is the story behind the 1996 Detroit Lions and their tumultuous relationship with the man upstairs. Before I talk about the actual incident in question that seemed to be the cherry on top in what was a disastrous season in so many ways, we need some context to understand the game itself that led to this post-game blow-up with God of all things. It's December 15th, 1996. It's week 16 of the NFL season. And as we're in the penultimate week and heading down the home stretch, we've got a game at the Pontiac Silverdome between 2 NFC Central rivals in the Green Bay Packers and the Detroit Lions. This is the final game for the Lions at home, so maybe they can give their fans something to cheer about for the first time in what seems like forever. But no one in their right mind is giving Detroit a chance in the world at winning this one. Detroit enters this game with a 5-9 record, having nothing to play for but pride, and having been mathematically eliminated from playoff contention. Meanwhile, the Green Bay Packers enter this game as, quite possibly, the best team in football. They have an 11-3 record, which is the best in the NFC, and is only 1 win behind the Denver Broncos for the top total in the league. They enter having scored 387 points, or 27.6 points per game, which is the best in the NFC, and is only 2 points behind the New England Patriots for the top total in the league. And they enter having allowed 197 points, or 14 points per game, which is only 9 points behind the Carolina Panthers for the top total in the league. The Packers not only boasted the best point differential in football at plus 190, but there was no close second, especially after the Packers not only entered this one on a 3-game winning streak, but entered on a winning streak where they outscored their opponents 93-32, including a 41-6 win over the AFC's best, the Denver Broncos. Long story short, this game featured the coldest team in football and a team that couldn't do anything right against the hottest team in football, a team that was the favorite to win the Super Bowl by this point in the year, and a team that really couldn't do anything wrong. And to the surprise of absolutely no one, sure enough, the Packers prevailed, decimating the Lions by a final score of 31-3, and keeping their momentum alive as they try to get the number 1 seed in the conference. It's funny, because in no way whatsoever do the stats suggest that the game should have been a blowout. Green Bay had 20 first downs compared to 19 for Detroit. Both teams turned it over 1 time, and the Lions actually had more time of possession and fewer penalties and penalty yards. However, sometimes the stats can be misleading, and this was one of those times, because everything about this game for Detroit was ugly with a capital U, as outside of a 39-yard field goal by Jason Hanson in the third quarter, the Lions couldn't put themselves on the scoreboard. It doesn't help when the Lions have 2 drives that reach Green Bay's red zone inside the 10-yard line, and they walk away from both drives empty-handed. It didn't help when the Lions had no chunk plays at all, with just one play, a 21-yard pass to Aubrey Matthews in garbage time with less than a minute in the game down 31-3, picking up more than 15 yards. It didn't help when Barry Sanders had less than 4 yards a carry and only picked up 78 rushing yards on the day, which is a bad game by his incredible standards. It didn't help when Scott Mitchell had poor protection and couldn't get rid of the football, getting sacked 4 times. And it didn't help when the special teams unit for Detroit could not stop Desmond Howard at all, allowing him to have quite a few nice returns, setting up nice field position. One of those returns was a 92-yard punt return for a touchdown in the second quarter to make it a 2-score game and really blow this thing wide open. It was another bad day at the office for a really bad football team. So the game itself was a bloodbath and was a typical disaster for Detroit. However, before talking about what happened after the game with frustrations obviously high in Detroit, we need to talk about the 2 main characters who play a central part here. Both of these players are some of the greatest players to ever suit up for the Detroit Lions, and are regarded as team legends. In one corner, you have this man right here, wide receiver Herman Moore, who you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. You could make the legitimate argument that Moore was the most underrated wideout of the entire 1990s, as he was an absolute beast for Detroit throughout the decade. The former first-round pick out of Virginia finished his 11-year career in Detroit with 670 catches for 9,174 yards and 62 touchdowns, including 4 consecutive seasons from 1994 to 97 with over 1,000 yards receiving. By the time Moore's career ended, before Calvin Johnson broke all his records, Moore was the all-time leader in franchise history in receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns, and he is in the pride of the Lions for a reason. In 1995 and 1997, he led the league in receptions, and during that 1995 campaign, he set the NFL record at the time for most catches in a single season, by catching the ball 123 times. Moore was really good in 1996 as well, as he would end the year as an AP First-Team All-Pro with 106 catches for 1,296 yards and 9 touchdowns. And in that aforementioned game against the Packers, he had 5 catches for 50 yards, so he made an impact in some ways. In other words, Moore was one of the leaders and influential figures on the team. And in the other corner, you have this man right here on the opposite side of the ball, defensive end Robert Porcher. Porcher is one of the best defenders in franchise history, and is a member of the Lions all-time team for a reason. By the time his 12-year career in Detroit was done, he would make it to 3 Pro Bowls, and would amass 95.5 sacks, including 5 seasons with double-digit sacks, including 2 seasons where he finished inside the top 5 of the NFL in that category. Porcher finished his Lions career with the second most sacks in franchise history, as his 95.5 sacks ranks only behind Alex Karras, who had 100 sacks unofficially in his career with Detroit and would eventually get inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2020. During the 1996 season, Porcher had 10 sacks, which led the team, and at one point during that aforementioned Packers game, he sacked Brett Favre, so he also made an impact in some ways. In other words, Porcher was one of the leaders and influential figures on the team. So getting back to this train wreck of a game right here, afterwards, following a cool-down period and some talk in the locker room from head coach Wayne Fontes, it was time for the team to come together in prayer. Now you might be saying, wait a second, time out. Why is everyone in the locker room praying together? This is not a private Catholic school or a team where everyone's got the same belief systems. It should be your right entirely whether you want to join the team in prayer or not. And if that was your first instinct, then, oh man, are you in for a treat with what's about to happen next? Because if there's one thing I know about Catholicism, it's that Jesus taught to love one another and not to engage in violence. As in, the exact opposite of whatever this prayer led to. Porcher was helping to lead the team in the post-game prayer, which was a ritual on the team. Well, as Porcher was breaking the team down in the prayer, he noticed that there were some Lions who were not huddled in with him. We don't know how many there were or who exactly they were, but we do know that one of them was none other than Herman Moore. Now, I don't know how religious either of these men are. I couldn't find anything in my extensive research where they quoted the scripture, or worked for the church, or became a pastor afterwards. However, while we don't know what was being said in this prayer, when Porcher noticed that Moore wasn't joining the team in this prayer, all hell broke loose. Because what was supposed to be a prayer before opening up the locker room to the media became an all-out fight. Moore didn't disrupt the prayer or anything like that. From all accounts, he just didn't participate in it. He just didn't feel like praying. But this outraged Porcher to the point where the two men went at it. And I don't mean just a few words exchanged and a shove before it got broken up. I mean that they had to lock the locker room for a bit before opening up to the media. According to one reporter from WXYT, a sports radio station in Detroit, it went on for a while. And suddenly, this game on the field that you've been watching became secondary to whatever the heck was happening in the locker room between the two men. Neither Porcher nor Moore commented on it, with Moore simply shaking his head and telling reporters, "That's my comment. I'm not talking. I'm going to be good today." And it seemed like players on the Lions wanted to keep this in-house, with center Kevin Glover saying on the matter, "It was in the locker room, and you're not part of the team. I'm not going to tell you." However, there was one man willing to throw his guys under the bus and disclose what happened and make this a story. Sure enough, it was head coach Wayne Fontes. That's a good way for Fontes, who was already on the hot seat, to have the support of his players and keep his job. Just disclose everything that happens in the locker room and spill the beans. Go out with the bang gossip style. Because Fontes said on the matter, "We wanted to bring the team up to say our team prayer. We always do, win or lose." And a couple of players were hanging off in the back and weren't coming up. Robert, who was a very emotional player, was very disappointed at a couple of the players that were hanging back and not coming up. I won't mention names, but I'll deal with them. That really bothered Robert, and he kind of went off, and I don't blame him. It's rare in a situation like this, where you see a coach picking sides over an internal matter that the players probably wanted to keep in-house. But Fontes did just that. This was a case of frustrations boiling over in what was a frustrating season, and all because of God himself. As for what happened after the incident involving this team behind me right here, the Detroit Lions lost their final game of the season to finish the year with a 5-11 record, and to the shock of no one, head coach Wayne Fontes was fired after a horrible, horrible season. It seems as though Herman Moore and Robert Porcher made amends, and this was kind of just water under the bridge after the 1996 season, which makes sense seeing as this was during one of the most frustrating seasons and frustrating time periods of their playing careers. And Moore's an offensive leader on the team, and Porcher is a defensive leader on the team. So it makes sense as to why this would kind of just blow over after the 1996 season was done. But still, it's crazy how bad the Lions were in 1996. They were so bad that they weren't just losing on the field, they were losing off the field in the locker room as well. When it came to this game right here, no game summed up how bad Detroit was and how far they fell than the Packer game. Show more fight off the field than on the field? Check. Lose a game to lose your 4th straight and your 8th in the last 9, and do it against a division rival that's had your number? Check. Get embarrassed on your home field for the final time all year? Check. Get outscored by 4 possessions and put together your worst offensive showing of the year from a points scored perspective? Check. And then, get into a fight after the game over God? Check. Because in 1996, the Detroit Lions were so bad that, quite literally, even God was not on their side. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.